of public land can be used by any driller to basically design a district where use of the compulsory integration statute will basically force unwilling landowners into a drilling combination. And literally, and what's particularly wrong about that process, and why I hope Senator Avella, the Senate, will put in a bill to prevent this, is under the compulsory integration process, the state is both prosecutor and judge. If the state becomes, by leasing its own land, beneficiary, prosecutor, and judge, well, I think everyone who's been involved in the legal process, the State Administrative Procedures Act, knows that this would be not only legally unethical, but I think illegal. And I think we should not ever lease our public land so that the net effect of doing so would be to force all these landowners around our state lands that have taken such good care of that land, and now we're going to expose them to all the ills that Elizabeth Rado talked about and many of the witnesses talked about today. That's not a fair way of treating our private landowners. Now, let me talk a minute about the laws we would love to see. There's no question that everybody in the Senate should endorse your moratorium bill. It's clear that this state is not ready. DEC does not have the answers. I agree completely with Kate Sindling. We don't know how to dispose of the billions of gallons of badly contaminated water. We heard from the chemists, carcinogenic chemicals, and I won't go over them, but simply stated, there is not a single wastewater treatment plant in New York State, public or private, that can handle those billions of gallons of wastewater. Until we have the answer to that, we shouldn't do a single well. And what's the hurry? Right now, natural gas is at the lowest possible rate. There's no reason that we have to bring this gas to market, and there's no reason we can't wait for the completion of public health studies and the completion of the two major water and air studies by the Environmental Protection Agency. Finally, I want to briefly address the issue of propane fracking. It is simply that some of the people who've talked about propane fracking have stated that it is outside the moratorium. It most certainly is not. Hydraulic does not mean water-based only. The governor's Executive Order 41 on creating the moratorium talked about new technology. This technology is less than 2 years old, and hydraulic fracturing, the moratorium applies to anything over 300,000 gallons being used in the frac, and clearly propane fracking clearly does. So propane fracking has a number of other impacts that we have not looked at all. Use of pressurizing to that degree of that much liquid propane gas causes a greater danger of explosion and fires. And there's a lot of evidence that because of the cost of propane over water, the industry would have to use a lot more densely spaced wells in order to get the money out. And we don't want more landscape chewed up just because we're using propane fracking. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for holding this forum, Senator Avella. And I'm come to address, I'm Mark Schaub, NYH2O, and we've been an advocacy group for quite a number of years to stop hydrofracking in New York State. I want to get down to the end, which has been partially alluded by my fellow person in arms here, by Kate Sindig, by Kate Huntsman, about what do you do about the wastewater flowback. And I'm going to get into the further nitty-gritty. It's the publicly owned treatment centers, publicly POTW, and to get even further into the nitty-gritty, it's about the crucial critters. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is actually bacteria, but they are crucial. They are the central part of how our wastewater treatment plants work. And if biocides are introduced because these plants can accept the flowback water, it will kill these crucial critters, and it will severely detrimentally affect important water bodies. We're very lucky here in New York State. SUNY Stony Brook has an excellent program that has been studying all the tributaries and water bodies around Long Island and into New York City. And I met a young gentleman who was doing a very extensive study of Jamaica Bay, where there are many wastewater treatment plants that empty into Jamaica Bay, and I have to report to you that is in a very fragile state. So I'm going to ask you to do a health assessment of all species, including these crucial critters that are in our wastewater treatment plants. I also want to add, there was a story out of Pennsylvania. The two major water companies have signed up with the energy companies because they feel there's a lucrative business to sell their water to take care of the wastewater flow back. Dilution's not going to do it. And the fact that our health, our water, and our food take second place to the industry is something that we ask our government to make sure it doesn't happen. The other thing I want to bring up is that Grisanti, Senator, your colleague Grisanti, has sponsored S6893, which does mention the issue, the nitty-gritty that I've been talking about in Section 1, and I applaud that. But Section 2 is full of loopholes, and I ask you, who is for a ban and understand this, to speak to your colleague and to eliminate the second section, because it say you can appeal about delivering this, or you can, there is an out. So I ask, frankly, that would be eliminated. I have here a paper from Southampton Press. You say, what does Suffolk County has to do? The future, unfortunately, is in Shinnecock Bay, in the western part of the bay. It is a dead zone. Why is it a dead zone? Because the sewage cannot be treated properly. And we don't want this to happen in the major metropolitan areas where millions of people live and the sewage cannot be treated properly. So I thank you. I submitted my wastewater treatment paper to you. I've submitted maps of where all the treatment plants are, and I will submit to you the article from the Southampton Press.
Thank you. And just to comment on you mentioning Grisanti's bill, I don't remember if your specific comment was in my letter to him, but I did take into account a number of comments from a number of groups as to how his bills could be improved. Some of us fear that though this is cover for the Republican majority, so that they can say they're very interested in hydrofracking and pass what are less than the minimum requirements of what should be done. So I'm waiting for Grisanti's response back to my letter, but I'll check to see if that comment was in, because we did a number of comments.
Thank you.
But that concerns me greatly is I don't want someone, and I don't care who it is in the legislature, to use this as an election tool to say, oh, I'm really involved in this, and pass some sort of very wishy-washy piece of legislation that gets us nowhere and just allows hydrofracking to go on. So I'm very careful about looking at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Avella, Senator Kruger, and Senator Serrano, and especially to Senator Avella for holding this hearing. My name is Gusti Bogok. I've been involved in the fracking issue for 3 years now. I'm the co-chair of the Sierra Club Atlantic Chapter Gas Drilling Task Force. The Atlantic Chapter was one of the first groups to come out for a ban, and unfortunately, certain things happened where we weren't able to advocate fully for it. My personal feelings go a bit stronger than the ban. I feel that this is a criminal activity. It harms people. Any other activity that harms people needs to be criminalized, has been criminalized. Why not? Fracking will ultimately kill people. It is killing people, it's making people sick, it's permanently damaging the environment and our future resources. It's insanity. I'm actually here to, however, having said all that, and I'm speaking personally, that those were my personal comments, not associated with the Sierra Club. I'm here to read the testimony of Dr. Ronald Bishop, and so I'd like to, it's kind of a long treatise here, it's 12 pages. I'd like to just read the introduction and summary, if you wouldn't mind. So, Dr. Ronald Bishop, Chemistry and Biochemistry Department, SUNY Oneonta. Thank you for inviting me to air some of my concerns about the petroleum industry in New York State. I'd like to bring your attention to this industry's record of cleaning up old well sites. Fewer than 1 out of every 7 depleted oil and gas wells for which there are records have ever been plugged as required by state law. Please refer to your copy of the soon-to-be-published article on the history of oil and gas well abandonment in New York State. And this is not just an old problem. The most recent plugging rate is the lowest recorded rate in our history, with fewer than 1 out of every 15 wells on average being plugged these days. The petroleum industry in New York systematically ignores state law, leaving over 93% of its spent projects to be cleaned up by, quote, someone else. State agency officials have never brought this industry into compliance, and their regulatory control has measurably weakened over time. Therefore, any legislation you advance will have limited impact on the prosperity, health, and safety of New York citizens, as long as the executive branch of state government continues to let us down by failing to enforce it. So before petroleum industry operators are allowed to prosecute projects of unprecedented intensity, complexity, and scale in their exploration and production and transportation of natural gas from unconventional reservoirs, you should explore ways to require that they clean up the old messes before they are permitted to make new ones. Until the industry's proven culture of ignoring state law is reversed, writing new state laws will be of little value. And then I'd just like to read his summary. The aim of this study was to evaluate the success of New York State's regulatory program for the oil and gas industry with respect to post-production plugging and reclamation. Annual reports from the Division of Mineral Resources, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation over the last 25 years portray an oil and gas industry which has consistently neglected to plug most, 86%, of its depleted wells. In this regard, the most recent record has been the worst. Plugging percentage rates ranged from 3.5 to 7.1% throughout the 2000s. Further, there is no program existing or proposed to periodically monitor and repair plugged and abandoned wells, which have begun to leak. Therefore, new plugging and reclamation guidelines presented in the revised draft supplement to the generic environmental impact statement for oil and gas and solution mining regulatory program and proposed new regulations for plugging and abandoning depleted oil and gas wells are inadequate. Moreover, they are mere academic exercises. Unless the state of New York does something to dramatically alter the long-standing culture of neglect, we can reasonably expect oil and gas industry operators to ignore any new standards, just as they systematically ignore existing standards today. New York's oil and gas industry is just 9 years from its bicentennial since the pilot project, a natural gas well near Fredonia was drilled in 1821. As our first oil and gas wells went into decline, a new issue was recognized, and New York State became the first state to require the plugging of abandoned wells in 1879. No particular state entity existed to monitor compliance or enforce the plugging law, but an 1892 amendment to it offered half of any collected fines to informants who reported violations. 130 years later, we have a dedicated and sophisticated Bureau of Oil and Gas Regulation within the Division of Mineral Resources of our Department of Environmental Conservation. State guidance documents and regulations have undergone multiple updates, including those newly proposed in the revised SGIS for oil and gas solution mining. With great attention paid these days to questions of proper gas well construction, appropriate control of chemicals and waste, and other production issues, post-production cleanup has received relatively little notice. In numerous discussions with both opponents and proponents of shale gas development, all appear to consider our state's legacy of improperly abandoned oil and gas wells a real problem, but an old problem. The common perception is that DEC is now the DEC now has this issue under control. He goes on, but since the time is short, I will just submit this testimony. It's basically that we can't even control our old wells, let alone start drilling thousands of new wells. Thank you.
Senator Avella, Senator Krueger, Senator Serrano, thank you very much for your wonderful work and for holding this forum. Thank you. We are deeply appreciative. I'm Susanna Glidden, Chair of Hands Across the Border in Westchester and Putnam counties. After 3.5 years, New York still has the worst fracking regulations in the nation. New York has no tax at the wellhead, but has free water for frackers. New York has no place to get rid of fracking flowback except to illegally dump it in our beautiful rivers and streams, and now unconscionably permitted by DEC to spread it on our roads. New York has not overturned compulsory integration, and New York still has no health impact assessment. New Yorkers are despairing of our state government, especially the Republican-controlled Senate and Governor Cuomo, for the way Cuomo is conducting the recklessly inadequate review of high-volume hydrofracking for natural gas, disregarding the science that proves its dangers. The governor and key Senate leaders should be voted out of office. The head of the DEC Minerals Division fired for refusing to protect New Yorkers and our natural resources, while instead putting our very lives at risk by marching us down the road of public safety, environmental, and economic ruin. It is suicidal to use up and lethally poison our precious, finite, and ever more scarce fresh water supply on Mother Earth. On May 4th, when it's released, please obtain a copy of the documentary, Last Call at the Oasis. See how few years are left with water supply for our western cities and our Midwestern breadbasket. Only 4 years of water remain in Lake Mead. The Ogallala Aquifer is nearing extinction, and countries around the world are suffering agonizing scarcity. We are in deep water crisis already, yet New York State has not stopped this fracking madness. Fracking, as Gusti said, is a crime against humanity and against all species whose lives depend on clean water, air, and land. We implore our legislators to stand up to the governor, to keep at it no matter how insurmountable it seems, and to find the way to say no to gas drilling. Fracking and receipt of out-of-state frac fluid and drill cutting should be prohibited, as put forth in your wonderful S-4220. And legislatively, fracking should also be made the crime that it is by passing Public Law Number 1 to criminalize hydrofracking, a draft herewith submitted. This bill would make corporate frackers the Class C felons that they are. Please prohibit and criminalize fracking. Keep New York and your constituents safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm told that we have 50 speakers left and we have a half hour to do it. So obviously we have a problem. What we'll continue to do is call as many panels as we can. If you've signed up to speak and you'd like to cut short your testimony so that others may speak on your behalf, if your name is called and you just want to recognize you waive your time to speak, but you just want to be put in record as opposed to hydrofracking or support in one bill, that would be helpful. But we'll keep going until we have to stop.
Okay, the next panel, Susan Van Dolsen, David Braun, Jeanette Rice, and Frank Patterson.
And who's the four after that?
Okay, now you're jumping ahead of me now. No, whatever.
Shall I just start?
Yes.
Okay.
The faster you start, the more we can hear from.
Okay, is that on? All right.
Yes.
My name is Jeanette Rice. I live in the Hill Towns outside of Albany, and I'm one of the 250 health professionals that signed the letter requesting a health impact assessment. I'm also serving on our town's hydrofracking moratorium committee, but I'm here as a concerned citizen and a grandmother because I really love our state and I'm concerned for the future. A lot of points in my report have already been covered, so I'll kind of skip around and try and cover some things that I haven't heard. I've read the American Oil and Gas reporter, Kevin Fisher's report that some of you may have seen saying, no problem with fracking because we have a lot of impermeable layers of rock between the aquifers and the fracking. And the study released in February by the Energy Institute at the University of Texas at Austin says that there's no evidence that groundwater is contaminated from fracking 2 when it's done at normal depths. However, there's a little footnote in the study, if you read on, that said, well, in some cases, like in Pavilion, Wyoming, there seems to be a problem, but they're fracking at untypical depths, such as 2,000 to 3,000 feet. The report ends with statements, gaps remain in understanding, especially in cumulative and long-term impacts, and we're hobbled by the lack of baseline information. Now that right there is a significant argument against fracking. So not a good result there. So I started to question, well, what are the drilling depths in New York State? Looking at figure 4.8 from the SGICE, there's a map with the 29 counties that overlie the Marcellus Shale fairway. 27 of those counties have drilling depths that would be 3,000 feet or less. I thought that was an interesting point. And I heard some information about conduits today, fractures and so forth. We also have karst topography that serves as another conduit for contaminants. There's a Petroleum Technology Transfer Council manual for independent oil and gas operators that outlines the risks. That information is in there, so I don't want to take up my speaking time in there. And there's information that if New York State does frack, our Marcellus gas will make up less than 1% of all the U.S. energy needs. So our citizens are supposed to risk it all for that? It's just unconscionably wrong. It's not good. I happened to run into Governor Cuomo last week in the hall on the second floor. And
Well, speak up. I want to hear this one.
I wasn't going to tell this, but oh well, here I am. And he asked me what I was in the Capitol building to talk about, and I said, well, hydraulic fracturing. And he said, and what do you think? And I said, I really don't think New York State is a match with hydraulic fracturing. And I really loved what you said in the State of the State address about developing our hydroelectric energy. We know what he didn't say. And we could be leaders, we could be national leaders in the development of renewable resources. We could be national leaders as the agriculture state, the tourism state. We have a wonderful opportunity here. You know, in history, we switched from sea oil to land oil. There was a change in the economy. There was a change in lifestyle. Now we can switch from land oil to renewables. What a wonderful opportunity. You want to know what he said?
I'm dying to hear what he said.
Well, the DEC has a report coming out in a few months. So I have a lot of information in my report, and I thank you so much for your leadership, and I'll yield to you.
Hi there. My name's David Braun. I work with an organization called United for Action, and also work with New Yorkers Against Fracking, a new coalition to ban fracking here in New York State. I'm curious to see if some of the new report that the DEC puts out includes some of the expert testimony that has been included here today. If it doesn't, I think it calls into question the basis of what our democracy may be founded on, and the political system that we're working in. It would certainly be unfortunate to demonstrate our democracy and this whole political system that we're engaging in to be a sham. I mean, I find it somewhat interesting that we haven't even been asked whether we actually want this or not. We're actually just being able to be funneled into what regulations we can try and argue for or against. And in the end, it seems like none of whatever we weigh in on is actually being included. So I think that there's a strong feeling among many New Yorkers that are actually not standing to financially benefit from this, that this process is a bit of a sham, and it would be unfortunate if hydrofracking were to move forward. I want to thank you very much for your efforts and all you're doing to call attention to this issue, for the ban bill, and for everything else that you're doing. Thank you and God bless you. Without you in the Senate minority, I don't know where we would be. I want to just highlight a couple of things. There are truly hundreds of reasons not to do this practice. We're hearing them all highlighted today, tenfold. I mean, I think we probably heard more than 100 reasons, and we'll be hearing more if we just keep digging into this whole thing. So it's, to me, bizarre that this could actually even be considered. Last night, United for Action held with great many other co-sponsors, held a forum at the Ethical Culture Society on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It was called Frackonomics, and we included Jeanette Barth, who spoke earlier today, and Deborah Rogers, who is a financial consultant, and has appeared in articles in the New York Times and in Rolling Stone. And also Al Appleton, the former DEP commissioner, and I just want to give some highlights of the things that they mentioned in the economic discussion. I think it's noteworthy to appreciate that 600 people attended the event last night. 80% of the wells are not profitable. 20% of the wells actually cover the drilling costs. So that means that the promises that have been made to the New Yorkers who think that they're going to strike it rich won't actually happen. Jeanette Barth mentioned that the jobs are not there. The industry claims that 88,000 jobs were created in Pennsylvania after her analysis. 6,600 net jobs over 3 years were created. Deborah Rogers talked about boom and bust. They are worse off in Texas, where in places where this drilling has been going on after the drilling is finished than they were before. From an economic standpoint, Al Appleton spoke about how fracking will suck the wealth out of New York State and transfer it to the gas companies. Al Appleton also spoke about how can an industry that is not making money be of economic benefit to the state of New York. Al Appleton also spoke about how he could potentially write regulations that may actually serve to regulate correctly, or he didn't say safely. But this would just be simply something on paper. The enforcement of it would actually never occur because we would never actually hire enough people to enforce the regulations. And of course, the industry would never abide by it, and they always cut corners. That's what they've demonstrated time and time again. There is no reason that they'd actually change, because it would be unprofitable for them to actually adhere to any sort of regulations. And because of this, Al Appleton, the former DEP commissioner, said that we need to ban hydraulic fracturing. With that, I will end my comments. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Senator Avella. Thank you for inviting me today to speak. My name is Frank Patterson, and although I am past president and member of People for Health and Environment Incorporated, I speak for myself today. I'm a retired manufacturing, engineering, and purchasing manager from IBM and Lockheed Martin. I live in the town of Venetton, Chemung County, New York, Chemung County, state of New York. My home is located 18 miles north of Bradford County, Pennsylvania. Venetton has 27 vertical and/or directional gas wells into the Risking Shale or Trenton Black River sandstone formations. Some of these wells are inactive and date back to 1938. However, 12 of these wells are gas producing. In 2010, Epsilon Energy drilled 3 more wells into the Risky Formation with the openly expressed intent to save the lease and to wait for New York State to permit Marcellus gas drilling. All 27 of these wells are located within 8 miles of the Millennium Pipeline and 2 associated compressor stations. In my opinion, the town of Venetton has 15 well pads that are Marcellus shale shovel-ready. I have concerns. 1, any form of high-pressure fracturing of the shale rock formations will release volatile organic compounds contained therein into our potable water supplies and ambient environment. Dr. Terry Engeller, professor of geosciences at Penn State, a leading authority in the Marcellus gas shale play, has presented in public forums that these shale formations deposited some 3.5 million years ago have already been naturally fractured. Consequently, gas has been continually migrating horizontally through these fractures and vertically through the faults to the Earth's surface. In my opinion, refracturing these shale formations will result in the immediate release of additional VOCs into the natural fractures and faults. Cornell University professor Dr. Anthony Ingrafia, who did R&D for oil and gas industry for 25 years, specializing in hydraulic fracture stimulation and pipeline safety, has presented data showing Pennsylvania has experienced 6.2%, that's 211 out of 3,391, of gas wells drilled in 2010-2011 failed from methane migration. 137 casing and cementing violations for 97 wells, that's 1.4 per well, were issued over a 17-month period from 2010 to 2011. 1.26 cases of gas migrating into groundwater for every 1,000 new Marcellus wells drilled in 2009 and 2010, increased to 7 cases out of every 1,000 wells drilled in 2011. My number 2 concern, release of these VOCs is hazardous. PhD Theo Colburn of the USA EPA Endocrine Disruptor Screening and Testing Advisory Committee and EPA Endocrine Disruption Methods and Validation Subcommittee testified before the House Committee on the applicability of federal requirements to protect public health and the environment from oil, gas, and development said, when methane very toxic gases that are being vented by the tons every year for each operational unit. 171 products used in natural gas development and delivery contain 240
Thank you. All I can tell you is we're going to do our best to keep fighting this battle, you know, and that goes for everybody else that's here. We're not going to give up. Unfortunately, within the Democratic Minority Conference, we can't put a bill on the floor unless the majority allows us. And one of the things that I actually tried to do, which I think I mentioned before, was I actually did a hostile amendment during the budget negotiations for the health impact assessment. And they shot me down as being not germane. You know, so we're trying. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, the next panel, Clark Rhodes, Eric Weltman, Marion Carl, Keith Shue. And what I'll do if not all those folks are here and, you know, we have an empty seat, I'll call another person up.
Good afternoon. I don't need this.
Wake us up.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Weltman, and I'm senior organizer with Food and Water Watch, a national consumer organization that works to ensure that our food, water, and fish we consume is safe, accessible, and sustainably produced. We thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today in support of legislation to ban fracking in New York, Senate Bill 4220. We are also part of a large statewide movement to ban fracking. Food and Water Watch is a member of New Yorkers Against Fracking, a coalition of 88 organizations and growing that is working to ban fracking in New York. We believe a ban on fracking is the most prudent, sensible step to protecting our water, air, and food from fracking. Food and Water Watch has essentially three concerns with proposals to frack New York. First, the so-called benefits of fracking are enormously exaggerated. The claims of promoting energy independence are belied by the industry's drive to export the gas. And the number of jobs that fracking would create for New Yorkers has likewise been proven to be distorted. Second, the negative impacts of fracking have been understated or overlooked. These include the impacts to public health as well as to agriculture, tourism, and other sectors. Third, and fundamentally, we believe the evidence is clear. Fracking is inherently dangerous and beyond our capacity to regulate. In the final analysis, there are safer alternatives to natural gas, but there are no alternatives to water. The only safe and prudent step is to ban fracking in New York. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Senator Avella, Rebecca, and Senator Serrano. I want to thank you for your bravery, because I know that there are many very wealthy organizations that would like to take you out. And it is brave.
You can actually list them in order, you know.
They must be tremendous, and the pressure on you is tremendous, and I appreciate your bravery. When I was in New York, I said that the S-Geist was a combination of a sales document and a novel called Lying by Omission, that had a hole so big that it would sink the great ship, the USS President Cuomo. My opinion has not changed. What I want to talk about right now is a document that I found. And this document was prepared and presented for the Society of Petroleum Engineers International Oil and Gas Conference exhibition in China, held in Beijing, China, November 2000. The following are direct quotes from that document. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll just read a little bit. The consequences of cement shrinkage are non-trivial. In North America, there are literally tens of thousands of abandoned, inactive, or active oil and gas wells, including gas storage wells, that currently leak gas to the surface. Much of this enters the atmosphere directly, contributing to the greenhouse effects. Some of the gas enters shallow aquifers, where traces of sulfur compounds can render water non-potable, or enters gas household systems to come out of taps when taps are turned on. Because the nature of the mechanism, the problem is unlikely to be attenuated, and the concentration of gas in the shallow aquifers will increase with time. I will give you the rest of the summary and the actual document for you to use in your things. Thank you very much for your time.
Senators, thank you very much for taking my comments. My name is Marion Carl. I live in the small village in Middlefield, the town of Middlefield, and it's one of the few communities, two actually, that are being sued by a natural gas company over our land use ordinances. And we're feeling a little bit like David fighting Goliath, and hopefully with your help, our story will end as happily as David's did. Events in other states have given us a laundry list of things that can and do happen in the process of hydrofracking. And most of these have been discussed already by other people who are able to speak much better than I am. I'll just run through them real quickly. Water pollution, air quality, noise, light, and dust pollution. I think people didn't mention that as much. Gas companies call these annoyances, but they can really impact the surrounding community. Property values was discussed pretty thoroughly. Increased traffic, security and social costs, economics, and environmental issues. The governor has said, let's get the facts. Let the science and the facts make the determination and not politics. Relatively recently, he formed a hydrofracking advisory panel. The most recent appointment is Robert Hallman, who is an environmental lawyer and former chairman of the New York League of Conservation Voters. You would think that with his background, he would be saying no gas drilling, but instead he has been tasked with providing guidance on natural gas production for shale deposits. So I'm feeling a little bit frustrated, and I'm saying, where is the science here? Where are the facts? Is anybody listening to the protests of people in communities around the state who are claiming their right to home rule? Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. My name is Keith Shue. I live in Cherry Valley, New York. I'm an engineer with experience in distributed technology, reliability, and failure rates. I also worked 5 years for the Nature Conservancy, focusing on water issues and habitat fragmentation caused by infrastructure. I'm a solutions-oriented person, not someone accustomed to speaking in terms of absolutes. However, today I am speaking in support of a ban on the widespread use of hydrofracking because of, one, the technology itself, what we know and what we don't know. Two, the entirely flawed regulatory framework that has been proposed. And three, because far better alternatives exist for a long-term sustainable future. I had other, thank you. I had other comments I was going to make, but I want to address something that relates to my area of expertise, and that is forest habitat. A few years ago, the Nature Conservancy took upon itself to identify critical forest focus areas. And some of this information appears in the S-Guys, but I would say to you that that information has been grossly misinterpreted. The intent was to identify forest blocks with optimal habitat conditions, the goal being to provide connectivity between those optimal forest areas to ensure the long-term sustainability of ecosystems and wildlife populations. And that connectivity would be happening through other forest lands. It did not mean that the forest focus areas that were identified were the only forests in New York worthy of protection. There's an important statistic, and that is that 57% of the Marcellus Shale is forested today. However, only 6% of that lies within these optimal forest blocks, these forest focus areas. The S-Guys has incorrectly concluded that it is only that 6% that deserves some type of special attention. So you can visualize a massive scarification of the landscape with pipelines, with gas wells, with infrastructure, destroying the ecological integrity of an entire region. You might assume that within at least that small 6%, that DEC would say, well, okay, drilling is off limits in those areas. It does not say that either. Actually, DEC does not propose to restrict drilling in those places, only requiring some monitoring of impacts, if you will, and of course that monitoring would be happening by the industry. So finally, a reason I would say we do not need hydrofracking in New York State this decade, or any other decade, is because we do have better choices for a more sustainable economy. Already strides are being made upstate in wind and wineries and organic farming in a sustainable tourism industry based on the intrinsic natural beauty of New York. These emerging benefits will be lost if the proliferation of gas drilling transforms upstate New York into an industrial area. When I said I worked for the Nature Conservancy, that was in Florida. I recently relocated to New York. And I can tell you that Florida, unfortunately, is a state that's being systematically destroyed by unsustainable development. Sadly, most of the people who live or visit there have no knowledge of its beautiful rivers, its springs, or its biodiversity, instead because they're more interested in Disney World. But the people who visit upstate New York actually are aware of this state's scenic beauty, its amazing natural areas, and its rich rural heritage. That is why they come and why some, like myself, have chosen to make this place their home. We ask that you do not throw that away. Thank you.
Okay, this is going to be the last panel. Unfortunately, the senator will make a few comments as soon as we're done. Roger Downs, Allegra Schachter, Marion Rose, James Huffnagel.
Yes, for those of you, and I apologize, but we tried to get in as many people as possible and then, of course, not cut off people's testimony. This has been very enlightening for all of us, and a number of pieces of legislation I think I will adapt based on some of the comments where we're not covering some of the aspects of hydrofracking. If you didn't have a chance to speak, you can submit written testimony to us over the next few days. You can email us something. We'll give you our cards at the end of this forum. But I do appreciate all of you coming. I mean, your presence here made an impact on just being here. Because I can tell you, this was a lot of people to come for a forum in Albany. You don't usually get this many people from all over the state. So you made an impact just by coming here. And I can assure you, the other side of the aisle is hearing what's going on today, and the governor is going to hear what's going on here today. Thank you. Roger, you want to start us off? Roger, you want to go?
Hi, I'll speak briefly. The Sierra Club did submit lengthy testimony for this legislative analysis. I just want to thank the Senate Democratic Conference for holding this hearing today. You all have shown great leadership since the advent of this issue in 2008. I know that the Democratic Conference put tremendous pressure on David Patterson to initiate the draft supplemental, and since then you've done tremendous amounts to maintain this de facto moratorium. I apologize, today is Earth Day Lobby Day. I missed most of the hearing, so I'm sure that you covered quite a bit. I do want to at least make it clear the Sierra Club does support 4220, the ban bill. I know this has been a very difficult debate internally, but we support your efforts to make a very strong statement in New York after reviewing this since 2008 and participating in the secret process. We have come to the conclusion that there is no safe way to do this in New York, and that the DEC doesn't have the appropriate staff. Plus, looking at our goals for climate change, our goals for a renewable future, building infrastructure for hydrofracking is diametrically opposed to that goal of a renewable future. So with that said, we certainly support the efforts of your conference to push a health impact analysis through the legislature this year. And I thank you for trying to do what you could through the budget. It was a fascinating process, and we fell short. I want to just express a little caution, maybe, and this will be my concluding remark. Do no harm. I think that there will be some pressure, perhaps from the Senate majority, if we do apply enough pressure to get something done, and I think that there are some pitfalls that we want to avoid. On the local control issue, clearly the DEC can make that decision today that municipalities have the right to ban or to at least have powers over their local ordinances and zoning. We have two very strong court decisions from conservative justices. The Oppenheimer bill will do the job in terms of codifying it, but we know that there will be pressures to constrain those decisions. I would stay away from them if there is changes in language. I think we can really harm those decisions. On the hazardous waste loophole bill, I want to praise Senator Grisanti for expressing interest where most of the Senate majority has not, but I think that these bills do create some problems. He tries, I believe, to take your bill, closing the hazardous waste loophole bill, and find solutions to do the same thing. But because he differentiates between high volume and low volume, and we will anticipate thousands of low volume wells in the future, same waste stream, same problems, it will create a loophole, and I've outlined a number of scenarios in which these bills could perhaps harm our goal of reducing, if not eliminating, hazardous waste in our waste facilities. I'll just conclude by saying many of the legislative priorities outlined in the comments we gave you are measures that the governor can do immediately and unilaterally without legislative approval, affirming local land use laws in the context of oil and gas development, closing unfair loopholes that protect the industry from properly treating waste, mandating essential public health impact assessments for fracking, or even coming to the just conclusion that fracking should not advance at all in New York State, are decisions that Governor Cuomo could make today. We have put a lot of pressure on you and the Assembly to find solutions to these problems because the governor, to this point, has not acted. We appreciate your efforts, but if we were to see any real resolution on fracking, we need your continued leadership to advance these issues to the governor's desk and you as a conference. And I realize, he gave you horrible districts. The relationship isn't great, but I think as a unified conference, you should be asking for all these measures for him to do unilaterally through executive order, and if you can't do it through legislation. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Avella and Rebecca, for allowing me to speak today. My name is Allegra Schechter. I'm the founder of Roar Against Fracking. I'm from the little town of Roseboom, New York. We are at the headwaters of the Susquehanna River. Our little Pleasant Brook and Cherry Valley Creek merge, and it starts their long journey down to the Chesapeake Bay. If we don't stay clean and healthy, there's no help for anyone. I'm going to change my original topic because so many people touched upon it today. But we recently had two 100-year floods in the matter of a couple of months. Otsego and nearby Schoharie County were devastated. Homes, farms, and animals were completely washed away, as were our roads and bridges. As bad as that was, it would have been 1,000 times worse if, along with all that mud, there were also toxic chemicals spread across all our gardens, our farmland. Governor Cuomo was just in Middleburg last week. I saw him. He knows very well how the mud went all over Middleburg. That was the breadbasket of the revolution that is still our prime agricultural lands, and he was scooping mud out of basements along with everybody else. So he knows about the problem. We need our 100-year and 500-year floodplains maps redrawn before any drilling is allowed to commence. When small streams can turn into raging rivers in a matter of hours, these floodplains need to be protected from drillers. Until new maps are drawn, safety buffers need to be drawn around old maps by at least 1,000 feet and much, much more. Climate change can be expected to continue producing stronger and stronger storms. We need to be proactive and create buffer zones around even the updated maps. In Schoharie County, a huge fuel oil storage tank was completely knocked over, its contents of gallons of oil, fuel oil spilled on our farmlands. If there had been flowback water tanks, or worse yet, open pits of flowback water, they would have spilled all over our communities as well. The dangers of spreading these toxic wastes on our floodplains is just too great. The contamination of our homes, our food, and our water must be prevented. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator Avella. Good afternoon, Rebecca.
She's become famous.
No, so exciting.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. It's an honor. My name is Jim Huffnagel. I live in Wilson, New York, small town outside of Niagara Falls. And we drove all night. A carload of us came here. I'm with Rita Yelder and Frank. And we drove here, and it took all night. But it's well worth it. And I also wrote a column for the Niagara Falls Reporter back home. I think what we find really outrageous about this coming deck proposal for fracking in New York State is the fact that it exempts the New York City watershed and the Syracuse watershed from fracking, yet Western New York is wide open for it. This is inexplicable to us. We don't understand why we're being singled out to be exposed to this fracking. And why are our children less worthy of protection than children elsewhere in the state? Why is our water and our landscape being exposed by Governor Cuomo? We just do not understand that. I'd like to make the point that State Senator George Maziarz does not speak for us in Western New York. He does not speak for us. The Buffalo City Council speaks for us. They voted a total ban on fracking and transportation of frack water. That was well over a year ago, and just 2 months ago, the City Council of the City of Niagara Falls voted a total ban on fracking and transportation of frack water and treatment of frack water at the Niagara Falls Water Board. And it was us activists in Western New York continually bringing this issue to them, continually putting pressure on them that really brought that about. So many of us in Western New York do not subscribe to Senator Maziar's drill baby drill philosophy, and we're fighting him. He's not totally without flack in Western New York. And, you know, frankly, I think some of us were bewildered that he ever got appointed to Energy Chair of the Senate. Senator Maziarz has taken $38,000 from the gas drilling industry over the past 3 years, according to Common Cause. And that's the most of any state legislator in the state. He's, you know, and right now I'm led to believe this afternoon he's at a hotel on the other side of town addressing the Oil and Gas Drillers Association. We have over 200 years of gas laying beneath us, and there's no rush on this. The industry wants to liquefy it, ship it to Europe and China. Why are we exposing to this? So definitely we support a total ban. And once again, Senator, thank you so much for your leadership on this issue. It's so important to New York State. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments and everybody that made the long trip to be here. It's interesting, one of the things that you said, because when the proposed regulations came out, and there was this press conference by some New York City officials saying, oh, New York City watershed is protected. We're fine, including Mayor Bloomberg. And now DEP has come out and said, well, wait a second, we're really not protected. But one of the things I said to some of my colleagues, my former colleagues in the city council, and even some civic leaders in New York City, even if we were protected in New York City, what about the rest of the state? Aren't we all in this together? So, you know, from my perspective, I agree 100% with you. We're all in this. What happens to one of our neighbors happens to all of us. So I'm going to continue to fight. The Democratic Conference is going to continue to fight on this issue until we win. And I think at the end of the day, I think we do win. Because it's very hard for anybody who has a reasonable, open mind to look at the facts and say hydrofracking is safe. So thank you all for coming.